Hey, this is Don from Padlock Technologies, owner and principal. And I want to talk about a topic that I keep running into every time I talk to potential clients or just people in general. We're going to talk about TrustSec. And are you even ready for TrustSec? That's the real main question here. The problem I keep seeing is people drink the Kool-Aid per se, and they, want to institute TrustSec in their environment, but they're not really ready for it, right? So, what is TrustSec? TrustSec is an enforcement strategy used in ICE that decouples the IP address from your enforcement policy. So, the way that works is when something gets authorized on the network, they get something called a security group tag, right? Security group tag, or SGT for short, right? And then the enforcement policy now in your network is based on these tags. The problem here, and I'm going to get to what the problem is, but let me get a little bit into more into TrustSec design here. But I'm going to give you a preview. The problem here is nobody really thinks about their network in terms of, segmentation or what's on the network to properly pull this off. Like when people are mature in their enforcement model or security maturity model, they're ready, right, when they get to level 5. But most people are not at level 5. They're not even at level 2 per se, right? But if you think about it, or if you look at TrustSec as a whole, there's 3 phases in TrustSec. There's the classification, there's propagation, and then finally there's enforcement. So out of all of these, enforcement is the easiest one because this can be switch, router, firewall, ACI, SDA, SDA, SD-WAN. These are the things that are actually going to enforce your policy, your TrustSec policy. Propagation is, I would say, the next easy one, right? So you got 2 propagation strategies. You have SXP, right? Security Exchange Protocol that runs on 64999 as the protocol, and then you have inline tagging. Now the difference between the two is SXP is a control plane thing, so you have to have a connection to ICE. There's some limitations with ICE. You can't have 4,000 or 40,000 SXP connections because ICE can't handle that. You'll start seeing some problems in ICE if you do that. And inline tagging actually puts the security group tag in this thing called SMD, which is Cisco metadata, which is in the frame. Right? It's not in the packets, in the frame. And then you need devices that can even do inline tagging. You need a certain, because it's in the ASIC to do this, right? Most people are going to use a combination of either one or the other, or maybe a combination of both strategies. Really depends on your overall design and the equipment in your network. Where people get screwed at is classification. This is the hardest part of TrustSec because it forces you to think about your network in a certain way. And why is that? Because TrustSec has this thing called TrustSec matrix, right? So there's a matrix in here. So we're going to say TS matrix. Now this matrix is an n times n matrix. Now what's n times n? So if I have 10 tags, right? Now I have 10 tags that can be the source and 10 tags that can be the destination. So 10 times 10 is 100 square matrix. So now you can see where this number here can get really big. If you do 30 times the 30 tags, you do 40 tags, you do 100 tags. 100 times 100, you see how big your matrix is? It basically becomes unmanageable if you start going crazy with security group tags. And when I have the conversation with people, I literally just had this conversation 2 days ago. They want to tag everything under the sun. They want to give everything a tag. And then when we really expanded it, I usually like to show people, like, let's expand this all the way out. And then let's look at your TrustSec matrix. Do you think this is manageable? When we got done, when they decided to tag everything, they came up, they had about 1,000 tags that they wanted to do. And then I said, okay, so the 1,000 times 1,000. Now, I think that's 10,000, but don't quote me on that. All right. That's the matrix, right? Hopefully that number's right. If it's not, I don't need the math people in there like, oh, you can't do math. I'm a network engineer and I can do binary math very fast, but sometimes my math skills for other things a little slow, right? And then they end up saying there's no way we can manage that, right? Now, what I like to do is I like to tell people is think of your network in thirds. So you have 1/3 is users, 1/3 is computers, and then the last third is IoT, aka everything else. Now, when you have that type of mindset, it forces you to think of similarities in terms of devices and traffic flow and all that good stuff, right? So, because we're trying to keep the tags probably less than 15. Because again, if this is an n times n, if you go too far with the tagging, you will end up not being able to truly implement TrustSec in your environment because your TrustSec matrix is way too big. You can't manage it. And there is a lot of room to make mistakes, right? And TrustSec is a certain thing that if you don't do this right, you can potentially have a big problem down the line, especially when it comes to classification, because one thing that ICE loves to do is auto-populate, right? There's a setting that says auto-create the tags. Well, if you auto-create the tags, you kind of don't have a rhyme or reason for this tag number to be what it is. And it's a better way to classify than doing automatic tagging is to have your own classification structure that you can look at the tag and easily identify what that device is, right? And there is a method to do that. If we have a discovery call or we have a project, I'll go through the classification structure I like to use, which makes it a lot easier to kind of figure out what a device is just by looking at the tag number. But I don't want to get into that here. But this here, what I'm laying out is the reason why I'm asking the question, are you actually ready for TrustSec, or did you just drink the Kool-Aid? That you went to an event, they showed you some cool stuff that TrustSec can do, and you're like, wow, we want to implement that right now without actually thinking of everything that's involved in this, right? What I just showed you right here is just the tip of the iceberg. It is not, we're not going super deep in this video, but it is something that you really need to think about before you implement TrustSec. If you don't have a proper classification structure, your propagation and enforcement kind of goes after classification. If I'm going to say of importance, classification is the number one thing that's important in TrustSec. You have to have a proper classification model that you understand, or you're going to have a problem, right? Then propagation, then enforcement. It goes 1, 2, and 3, right? Propagation is really dependent on the devices and what the capabilities they can do. And enforcement is a simple enforcement strategy. Now, it is different in enforcement than the old school way, because the old school way used to use TLS 1.0 for, which was eat fast. It really used eat fast under the hood, and it would use this thing called a pack file. Well, as of ICE 3X, they got rid of that, and you're using, a REST API to do this. And that even is a whole different strategy, because now you have to worry about every device in your network that's going to do TrustSec from an enforcement standpoint now has to do a REST API call to get the environmental data into policy so it can enforce it. Well, that means every device that does this has to have its own unique ID. And that's because the old way of eat fast and TLS 1.0 has been deprecated. Now you can turn it back on and go and do the old way, but TLS 1.0 is not secure anymore, or not considered secure anymore. So you're inadvertently allowing a least secure protocol in your environment, which could have some exploits on it. Haven't looked it up, but then that could end up hurting ICE in the long run. So now 3.4 is supposed to come out with packless environmental data, or packless TrustSec environmental data stuff. So you can download that policy and environmental data, which is just the SGTs and stuff like that. But I haven't seen it yet, and I'm kind of just waiting for them to bake that in better before we just start implementing that style. So it's either TLS 1.0 less secure, so you can know you don't need the individual separate user IDs and passwords, or device IDs and passwords, or you go REST API, which involves every switch in your network needs to have the CA that signed the admin certs of all your PSNs. So now you have to have an internal PKI and all that going before you can do this. So this was a brief video of TrustSec as a whole, and it asks the question, are you ready for TrustSec in your environment? Are you truly ready for it? Or did you just drink the Kool-Aid, saw it was cool, and now you're trying to like jam it into your network without actually thinking about all the things that are involved with TrustSec? If you are one of those people that are ready for TrustSec, and in a consultative call, we would determine that. I'm going to leave a link in the description to schedule a discovery call with me so we can talk about your overall ICE infrastructure. You can only do this with ICE, by the way. You can't do this with anything else. So if you have like ClearPass or Fortinet or Forescout, this won't help you. But if you're in ICE and you're pretty mature in your ICE infrastructure and you're ready to talk about some enablements, that some more advanced features, aka posturing, aka TrustSec, if you're ready to do that, I'm going to leave a link in the description to do a discovery call. I will see exactly where you are. I will also determine through bi-directional communication where you're trying to go, right? Obviously, you're going to tell me what you're trying to do, and then I'm going to look at everything as a whole and say, okay, these are the strategies we can kind of tackle to get to where you want to go. But it will not happen unless we start out with where you are now. So that's the whole purpose of the discovery call. It's not to sell you or anything like that, because I don't even know if I can help you yet. So the link's going to be in the description. Once again, this is Don from Padlock Technologies. Hopefully this video was informative. Thank you and have a nice day.